I'm Ryan Ewing, founder and editor at airlinegeeks.com.
And I'm Kevin Cortez, and welcome to Inside Aviation, our first episode. Here we'll be talking about general aviation, airlines, business aviation, space, UAS, and kind of everything in between. Ryan, what do you think? How do you think this is going to go?
I think we're going to give it a try here and talk about everything under the sun within the aviation space. Pretty broad umbrella, but there's always cool stories to be told and plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I think it'll be a space where we'll be able to tap into topics that the community is talking about that basically nobody else is covering. And that was kind of the whole impetus of this podcast, is seeing these topics nobody is addressing and kind of engaging with community about it.
Look, we're here to stir the conversation about the aviation space.
Yeah, I think that's the main goal, right? Is kind of bring a new voice to it and kind of poke at it a little bit. But
yeah, I mean, look, there's tons and tons of aviation content out there, but we're here to tell some of the compelling stories that happen, and we hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this episode's kind of like a testament to that, because we are talking to Jack Daleo, who covers modern aviation for Flying magazine. So what that means is he covers everything, whether that's UAS, eVTOL, space, sometimes a little bit of defense stuff. And that's something I think is really interesting. It's not talked about enough because it's going to be touching every part of aviation, from flight schools to airlines to charter stuff. So I think it was cool talking to Jack Daleo about that today. And then we talked to Jack Sweeney about tracking Taylor Swift and Elon and Russian oligarchs. And who else did he do? Mark Cuban, I think.
Mark Cuban, that was my favorite.
Yeah, that was that's an interesting one, and I would love to get Mavs tickets like he did. But yeah, so these two guests I think are a good starting point for kind of what we're going with the podcast and talking about it. Kind of how Jack Daleo, I feel like he's ringing the alarm for us, going hey, eVTOL's coming, and it's going to affect all of you. And Jack Sweeney is obviously touching pop culture and weird ways, I would say.
There's a great conversation, to be had around what Jack's doing in the pop culture space, and of whether people have a reasonable expectation of privacy when they fly private.
No, yeah, for sure. And I don't know, I come at the whole both Jack conversations is from a GA and pilot standpoint, going hey, both of these topics, especially the Sweeney thing, is going to might affect us if, legislation comes out of this, or if, the FAA gets involved with this tracking stuff. And it's just a rabbit hole we can go down. And we kind of did with both of them. But,
well, and Jack's dealing with people, right, that's got big money, and big money sometimes means a little more power with the legislators. So
exactly.
We'll definitely see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know who he should be more scared of, the Russian oligarchs or the Swifties. And I think right now the Swifties are really just coming after him. It's it's wild. But yeah, no, we hope you enjoyed the first episode. Give us feedback, let us know what topics you like and which you don't. But yeah. All right, so we're talking to Jack Daleo today. He's a Flying Mag staff reporter, right? Reporter's his title. And he covers eVTOL, UAS, anything of electrification and aviation, basically that whole world. Today we talked to him a little bit about this new deal in Dubai made by Joby Aviation, who got an exclusive for the taxi air service within the city. And we dove into that, a little more of the legislation around eVTOL in the US and the logistics of it all. But anyways, here's Jack. All right, Jack, welcome to Inside Aviation here. So we're pulling you in because you had an interesting article here on the UAE doing a exclusive deal with, I think it was Joby Aviation, to do an electric taxi air service. And I thought it was pretty interesting because, obviously nobody else has done an exclusive deal, but it also got me thinking, is this going to happen in the US as well and other countries, just because technically it's a taxi service exclusive deal and it's not really like any other mode of transportation. So this kind of leaves it open for airlines to take advantage of this. Is that kind of right? Or is that kind of, am I reaching there?
I mean, I think you're spot on that it's a really unique arrangement that I personally haven't really seen it with other forms of transportation. Just to give people a bit of an overview, Archer and Joby, these are two air taxi manufacturers. They're both based in the U.S. They both have agreements in place to fly in Dubai. But Joby this week, they signed this exclusive agreement. It's with Dubai's Road and Transport Authority. That's the government entity that regulates public transport in the city. So they have exclusive rights to operate air taxis there for 6 years, beginning when they start service. That's expected in 2025 or 26. So, it's really interesting because I think the closest analog that we have to these urban air mobility air taxis is rideshare, right? Like your Uber and Lyft. Joby, Archer, and a few others have made that comparison. Joby is actually a spinoff of Uber. It used to be Uber Elevate. It's its own company now. And in rideshare, you're not seeing cities do this. Say Uber is only allowed to drive customers in this city. Lyft can't operate here. So I do think it's something we haven't seen before. And the fact that we are seeing it now opens the door for, to potentially pop up in traditional aviation. We definitely haven't seen it yet, but I guess depending on the success or failure of this, we could maybe see it pop up elsewhere.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And how does it conflict with because you also wrote about Archer announcing, planned sale of 100 aircraft to a Dubai-based operator, Air Chateau. Would that conflict with Air Chateau doing, Dubai to, other places flights, or is it just within Dubai that would be the exclusivity of Joby's agreement?
Yeah, it's a great question. That was my first question to them. So Archer, they haven't explicitly said that they won't be able to fly Dubai. According to what Joby is saying, that will be the case. But they have these two agreements in place. One is with Falcon Aviation, that's based in Abu Dhabi. The other is with Air Chateau. That's the company that you mentioned that they're selling 100 aircraft to. That's a Dubai-based company. Both of those contracts initially were meant to cover Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So they're going to continue to maintain those contracts, but Dubai, it appears, will be off the table.
So, Jack, I have an airline question for you.
Hit me.
That very, very curious to hear your thoughts. So, we see these airlines going out there and making these, we sometimes call them quotes, right? I mean, they're not always orders as much as they are firm commitments, is what they'll sometimes call them, for these electric air mobility airplanes. Not always eVTOLs, but sometimes they are. United made a significant agreement with, I believe it was Archer, correct?
That's right.
And then we have JSX, which is not technically an airline, but it's a charter air carrier, we'll call them, going out to do the same. And I think JSX had a very substantial commitment from 3 different manufacturers. In your mind, when do you sort of see these aircraft actually flying in revenue service for these carriers? Do you think the timelines that they're giving, some said late 2020s type of range is realistic, or do you see that sort of slipping?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's a loaded question, right? Because it's not just about the ability of these manufacturers to have the aircraft ready to fly and get them approved, get them type certified by the FAA. It's also the whole ecosystem around them, right? It's the regulations that need to be in place. We're still a little bit behind in that department. The FAA has had a few blueprints come out, but no hard rules or regulations for operations. And then there's the infrastructure component is another huge piece of this. You've got a couple of companies working to install chargers nationwide, like you're seeing in the EV space with Tesla, companies like that. So a few of these companies, Joby and Archer, have said 2025 is their target for entry into service. And I think that it's very possible that we see some really initial operations that year, but it's going to take probably at least a few more years before we really see the scale that these companies are envisioning, that they become routine flights. I know the FAA is kind of targeting 2028 as that year where we see, really air taxis all over the skies in major cities across the country. So I think probably closer to that year, 2028, is when we'll really start to see the services that these companies are talking about and really hyping up. I think early on it'll be pretty limited.
So for, it says here, like, they've, in Dubai at least, they've, settled on a couple launch locations, Dubai downtown, the marina, their international airport. At least in the US, like, sure, there's been like a couple locations where they're building just for eVTOL, but like, shouldn't they just be using GA airports in these cities that already exist and heliports that already exist? It feels like, building all this extra like eVTOL port situation is just going to run into the same issues as people are already having. Like, we're trying to like get permits for a heliport in the middle of a city, or, airports are having with noise complaints and all that. I know the whole thing with eVTOL is that it's supposed to be quieter, but if you've heard one of these things, like in a demo, they're pretty loud. So yeah, what do you think about that? About like all the infrastructure being built for it, and is it like actually necessary?
Well, and I'm going to throw something in there too, is that like, it's still an uncharted regulatory space too, right? I mean, in terms of heliports, you have airports, but sure, the FAA is asking the same question: what's an eVTOL port, and how is it different from a heliport?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head, both of you there. I think it's an entirely different thing. There's going to be a whole permitting process that needs to be in place for vertiports, just because a lot of them are going to involve having electric infrastructure there right away. And you're right about what you said, Kevin. The idea of using existing airfields. That's like exactly the strategy that a lot of these companies are going for. Archer, for example, they're looking at a route between Manhattan to Newark Liberty International, and they're planning to use the downtown Manhattan heliport as kind of their hub in Manhattan. So that's the strategy we're seeing a lot of these different companies look at too. Because you're right, it doesn't make sense to stand up an entirely different airfield for these operations. Like they're expensive enough already. The manufacturing costs. None of these companies are producing revenue yet, so you have to look to save money and be efficient wherever you can, and that's an example of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's almost like the eVTOL port's like a solution looking for a problem, at least now, because we don't really know like the use cases of eVTOL and how like adopted it's going to be by the general public. I feel like it's going to take a while. I mean, even helicopters still are like sketching people out. Another question I had about that is like, why start these air taxis and all this new tech for these new airframes when we have like, a proven one with like helicopters here? Like, should we just, use the engine and battery tech and just throw it in like a bell, and that'll like solve the issue of like, what they're going for with like electrifying everything? And again, I'm just coming from like, pilot point of view and GA. So that's kind of my questions with all this, is like eVTOL actually necessary when we have like airframes that work already?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I can tell you what these companies would say. It's that they're essentially creating a zero emissions, low noise version of a helicopter. And the reason that you have this kind of hybrid configuration with the vertical lift and the cruise is just for efficiency. A lot of them are looking at around 50 miles for an average trip, and just the ability to take off vertically and then cruise for 95% of that flight. It's the way they see it. It's helping them save a lot of efficiency.
Gotcha. So it'll be like kind of like a hybrid helicopter plane that'll go faster and cover, more ground. All right. No, I'm all for it at the end of the day. Like, so not against it.
I mean, but I think one of the big questions that you guys touched on this a minute ago is the infrastructure component around these things. You walk around a Target parking lot and you see, these one or two chargers for Teslas. And I'm sure, in this eVTOL space, the same problem is going to arise as what is kind of been arising with electric vehicles, which is you need infrastructure, you need charge ports, you need places for people to go charge these things. And there's, a sort of a capital cost when it comes to building the infrastructure around it. And so, we had JSX go out and make this large commitment for these aircraft. And part of that sort of commitment and the announcement that they made was that this would help small community air service. And, part of that, I think, is a little bit of a play to the regulator, perhaps, as they're dealing with some regulatory challenges in their certification. But when you think of a small airport that has lost all air service and having to go in and perhaps fund the capital cost of installing this infrastructure up front, don't you think that might be a bit challenging for for JSX or somebody else, or even these small airports to fund this sort of thing?
Yeah.
I guess my question to you is what sort of infrastructure is needed here, and how realistic is it for some of these airports to install it?
Yeah, I think it will be really challenging. It's a big thing that people in the industry are talking about is, how are we going to get the funding to install all of this stuff? And I think the answer that a lot of people are hoping for is federal funding. You're seeing more and more grants from the Biden administration. There was a recent one for $1 billion covering 114 airports. Initiatives like that are definitely going to help. But it's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be in place. It's more than just the chargers themselves. It's also the ground support, the transportation on site. A lot of airports are trying to electrify their ground vehicles as well. In the case of JSX, I think it's slightly different because the claim from some of the manufacturers that they're buying from, they're making hybrid electric models. And their claim is that they won't need additional electric infrastructure to be installed. They can fuel up with traditional jet fuel or with sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. So in that case, it might be a little bit different. But there's definitely going to have to be an overhaul at a lot of different airfields. And it's going to be a challenge, particularly for those smaller airfields, like you mentioned, that maybe aren't seeing as much service. And it's kind of ironic because those might make an ideal location for, eVTOL service, where you don't have to deal with traditional aircraft also sharing that airspace. Creates a headache for air traffic control. And, it's definitely a predicament that the industry's in.
Yeah, no, I think when this whole thing started, this whole push to eVTOL, in the late 2010s, I really just saw them as tech companies coming in and trying to disrupt aviation, which, is not always the best move, especially with this industry. But as it's gotten further along, I've seen them partner with, a lot of established aviation companies, organizations. Even NASA now has a air mobility study, which I think is pretty interesting. We can dive into in a whole different episode. But also I think they're going to eventually have to partner up with FBOs. Maybe it's a signature eVTOL situation where they start doing their own eVTOL, charging ports and all that, or Atlantic or one of these, because they already know the logistics of ground operations for private aviation, even charter stuff like Jet Suite now does. Kind of charter, it's 135, right?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Atlantic.
So yeah,
Atlantic actually just recently partnered with Archer, Joby, and Beta Technologies. That's another.
Well, there we go.
Actually.
See, I love to see that.
So they're looking at installing chargers at their FBOs. Clay Lazy Aviation is another one. Two of their FBOs in California. They're looking at working with Joby.
See, that's the perfect thing. See, it took these guys, these companies to realize hey, we need to use these assets inside the industry instead of coming in and going hey, we're doing our own thing. Because I think that'll just help since they already have it down to a science. The other thing I want to say real quick is I've noticed I think it was Lilium and Over Air have been hiring a bunch of government affairs people from AOPA, NBAA, and other aviation companies, which is pretty interesting because they're leaning into these people who have years of experience and dealing with the FAA and legislative bodies. So
that was my next question. It was sort of, where do you see the regulatory landscape going here, Jack, in the next couple of years?
It's a question that I don't think anyone has the answer to. We can only speculate, but progress it's slow, but I think it is steady now. AAM, Advanced Air Mobility, is something of a priority for the FAA now. The new administrator, Michael Whitaker, used to be at Supernal. That's the air taxi subsidiary of Hyundai. So he brings that expertise to the table. Billy Nolan, who just departed, he joined Archer as their chief safety officer. So there's definitely something of an onus that the FAA has, especially when you consider this idea of, having the US be the leader in this space. Recently we had EHang over in China. They got the first type certificate for an eVTOL. I'm sure that there are certain folks in the FAA that see that as a threat. They want to, get on top of that and be the leader. So I would expect there to be a sense of urgency in terms of the legislation coming forward. And FAA reauthorization also has some implications for that. There's some language in there that would require the FAA to come up with a solid plan for air taxi integration in the next couple of years. So the ball is rolling. It's just it's difficult to say exactly how it'll play out. But I think the one thing I can say is that the philosophy right now is to make use of existing infrastructure regulations as much as possible.
Well, and it almost seems like, you were saying too, Kevin, with the FBO partnership and that sort of thing, that, obviously the DOT funds essential air service activities. That's a fairly substantial program, but, it very well might be an opportunity down the road to sort of have the DOT fund activities around establishing this infrastructure or something like that, or that might be even more efficient than the essential air service structure. So,
yeah, I'll say one thing. If the U.S. does want to be the leader in this space, that I think that's probably going to have to happen. There's going to have to be a little bit more funding probably poured into the industry, whether that comes from the government or from investors. But things probably need to accelerate a little bit for us to become the leader, so to speak.
Well, Jack, I'm sure we'll be bothering you a bunch to hop on here to tell us about it, because this is evolving like way quicker than I can even keep up, and it's exciting. I like it, and I think people in aviation need to just embrace it because it helps everybody, helps drive funding to airports and different programs. But thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, and make sure you subscribe. If we didn't already plug it, we should plug it. Jack's newsletter comes out every Thursday, Modern Flying.
Yeah.
And Jack curates it. It's one of the best out there if you want to learn anything about what's going on. Highly recommend. I read it every Thursday.
It's awesome. I'll piggyback off of that plug. You can find that. It's linked at the bottom of all my stories, or you can follow me on X, Twitter, whatever we call it these days. Jack_Daleo. There's a link in my bio. So give it a read.
Cool. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're calling this one the Jack and Jack episode because we've got another Jack coming on, who is Jack Sweeney, who is the sort of controversial figure on Twitter and X who's been tracking most recently, Taylor Swift's airplane, and was called a, quote, awful human being by Elon Musk on Twitter. So he's a college student and aviation enthusiast, and he wants to share his story. So here's Jack Sweeney. All right, we're here, Jack Sweeney, who's joining us here on Inside Aviation. Jack, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and maybe what made you famous?
Yeah, so I'm Jack Sweeney. I've always been interested in aviation. My dad works for an airline and has for many years, so that's kind of how I guess I had some interest in it. And then I've always been interested in tech. So that's kind of, as a kid, I was always messing with computers or whatever related to technology. And at some point, I became familiar with like flight tracking apps like Flight Radar 24. My dad would always have that. And then I somehow became aware that Elon Musk had a private jet. And I kind of put it together that like it would be interesting to see where he goes, because like he's always got something going on. And that's really during COVID, I started like making the bot to, automatically track it and get notified about when that plane takes off or lands. And then I started doing it for more people, and Elon contacted me about his jet being tracked on Twitter, and that's all history now, pretty much.
I want to lead off with this because we're all on this show. We're all aviation. We have aviation backgrounds. We know a lot about ADS-B tracking, public information, what's not public, what is. But Jack, I want to hear from you. why don't you tell us a little more about ADS-B tracking and kind of help people understand, what it is and what it does?
Yeah. So, back a long time ago, planes just had like basic transponders and people use radar, but now the planes, they have ADS-B, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. And so that's like a standard that the transponders are in the planes that are mandated, whether it's the FAA and other governments around the world, that pretty much everywhere that's required. The plane is transmitting just like AM or FM, the altitude, the heading, the latitude and longitude, all that, the identifier, and which is like linked back to the tail number, and so much more stuff. Like there's also an accuracy of the GPS signal, which is a really another interesting thing that people have found to create maps of like GPS interference. So like really this data is really interesting, and thousands of people have set up receivers around the world, and people have created networks of this ADS-B data, and that's what I pull from, and then I'm able to deduce where these jets are landing and taking off from.
Can you explain like why like people on Flight Radar 24 and FlightAware aren't able to track, some of these block tail numbers, but you and other people can, grab the tail number and all that?
Yeah, so FlightAware and Flight Radar 24, while they have networks of ADS-B receivers too, they also use government information from the FAA. But when they get that information, they sign a thing that says, if you get this information, we have this list of operators that want their aircraft blocked. But if you're not using the FAA data, the live data, then you have to block those aircraft. But if you're not using it, then you don't. But that's not the same thing as like going to look up the ownership info, like on the registry. Like I could still do that, or you can still do FOIAs and get the registration documents.
Yeah. No. That's so a quick, just nerdy question. This network is pretty global then, because like, with your recent, tracking of Taylor, you were able to do it all, from Japan all the way here.
Well, so yeah, the individual ADS-B networks, they all have like their own different coverage. I mean, like even ADS-B exchange is not perfect. Like you'll see they have requests out for various airports. But with her recent trip, that was her charter jet with VistaJet, and that's not even a blocked plane. So like,
yeah, I mean they put that call sign. That was a wild.
Yeah. Not only was it not blocked, but didn't Vista tell you that it was the one?
So like people were sending me information, and that Flight Radar 24 thing where they put that the football era on that charter jet, that's not even a call sign. Like someone manually modified the system, the tracking system, to like put that on there. Like that's not even like the plane put that out, but like that required some work to do.
Yeah, I was telling Ryan that day when we saw that it was like the football era and the backup quarterback was the other jet. I was like, dude, VistaJet had to have taken like a haircut to be able to like advertise this.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish I knew what was going on there, but she keeps on using VistaJet. Like that's what she used to get to Melbourne, and people keep tracking those jets on Flight Radar 24, and yeah.
Well, yeah, is VistaJet Patrick's company, Patrick Mahomes, or what's his?
I don't think
Patrick has like an investment in one of these companies. But anyways,
it's probably Patrick probably has something that Wheels Up. Everybody has something.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. There's always Wheels Up for the athletes. But Jack, and I saw too. You just mentioned Melbourne, Sydney Airport. I think it was Sydney Airport actually, because I guess you had to stop. They posted the photo of VistaJet Global out there in the rain. That was obviously Taylor Swift's airplane.
I'm not even the one that's like posting the charter jet, because like I'm distracted by all this and stuff, and like that's why I love the bot that I've written, because like I just I set it up, I tell it the jets, and like that's what I love about it. It's automated for the most part, unless I'm like working on a new update or fixing bugs with the system.
So, you know, go out on Twitter or X, you know, a lot of people may not be fans of what you're doing. Why are you doing it?
Well, yeah, I mean, so for one, I mean, there's always going to be haters. And originally when I started, I have this aviation interest, which is still part of it. So I think it's cool. And there's like that newsworthy part of it. I mean, everybody's interested in where she is. And that goes for all the jets that I'm tracking. And now it really seems to be like important to share because these people want it hidden. Like, it almost makes you want to keep doing it because like we know it's there, and like for them to try to take it down, it just feels like wrong from someone that knows that like this can be done. It's not illegal. Like,
But and I don't know, and I'm not going to sit here and speculate what nasty letter Taylor Swift's lawyer sent you, but I think some people might claim that you have a reasonable expectation of privacy when you're on a so-called private jet. Do you think that's true?
I mean, to a certain extent, but this is the technology. I'm not the one that made this technology. And that's the way it is. I mean, there's other people that are, pulling up to the plane. I'm not telling people to show up to the plane and take pictures or like follow the car that leaves the plane. I'm like sharing it as a factual side. And like I try not to like go on anybody's side of like, oh, I don't like this person. It's simply like putting the information out there, like, kind of like journalism. And at this point, like regardless if I do it or not, like other people are going to do it.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask is like, has anybody reached out for you to like build a bot to track a certain jet, or or even like environmental organizations going like, hey, we need to like expose the use of these jets for these companies, these people, etc.?
I mean, there's Riley Chase, who runs this guy runs this company, Hostify, which hosts like Ubiquity software. We set up a bot for the Ubiquity CEO for his jet. So that was kind of interesting. And then there's someone who's like a son of like another guy that has a private jet, and I set up a bot for him because like apparently after the grandfather died, none of the family gets to use the jet, and he wanted to know where his father's jet was going, and it's on the blocked list. And so I helped him with that. Yeah. So I mean, that's really like one of the reasons why I want to set up like more of a website where I can do notifications, because like I think that's really something that I do well is like, there's all this unblocked stuff, but people want to be notified. We can't be sitting on the computer watching this website all day.
Yeah. And you can't be relying on like, Twitter posts or X posts, because eventually, who knows what'll happen there. All right. So I have another question for you. I know there's like the whole like carbon footprint side to this, which I'll get to, but I think like Elon's concerns and where like other CEOs or corporations' concerns might come into is like just business intelligence of like their private jets and where their executives are going. Like, can you talk a little bit about that and like what you've hit in that?
So with Elon, I think there's like a few things going on why he really didn't like it. And for one was like the employees, even like senior executives at Tesla, SpaceX, and Twitter, they would follow the account to know like when he would be in the office. And then the other part of it is if like two jets meet up in one area of like this company and this company, then they're probably doing a deal. I think a good example of that is, well, people already knew this was happening, but Elon's jet, Tesla, they flew to Reno, Nevada, and they had like a couple hours later, they had an event with Pepsi, and who they were announcing was this, using the Tesla semis, and they had the order. And Pepsi, I think Pepsi jets also flew in there too, private jets. So like,
So that's that. Just thinking like from a monetization point of view, you can sell this like as a product to
I
like
know.
companies.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
I've
I
heard
think it's
that.
interesting.
I've heard that like there's like might be like some platforms out there that like people are using to like trade on like this,
Yeah.
but like, they're not known. I don't know.
Yeah, because you can just create an API and plug it into anything. But that's super interesting. Just to back up a little bit, can you talk a little bit about like the recent book that came out that talked about you and at least according to them, you were one of the reasons that Elon purchased Twitter.
Yeah. So the book talks it's like the whole timeline of Elon buying Twitter, and a lot of he used the book when he used Elon Jet when he was writing the book, and it talks about like certain things were happening on his plane, certain important business decisions, and he brings up how right after he was trying to same time that Elon was messaging me, he was also messaging the then CEO of Twitter, asking him to suspend my account. And that didn't work. And then a few weeks later, he starts buying Twitter stock, like, which is like really weird. And I talked to the author of the book, and he said that people he talked to certainly thought that my account had really pushed Elon to buy Twitter.
That's insane.
That's crazy.
I mean,
Like-
no way to know if it's true, but like it just
yeah. Maybe we
people-
can just tweet at Elon and ask.
yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Ryan.
oh no, I was just gonna, go off the Elon thing. A couple of weeks ago, right before the Super Bowl, I think he called you a quote awful human being. Those are his words
Yeah.
on Twitter. I'm sure you saw that post. How does that sort of make you feel, Jack? I mean,
It's kind of crazy because like I still think he does like good stuff with Tesla and SpaceX, but obviously I don't like that. I guess well, first off, he didn't like it in the first place, and then like it's all over the internet now, so like obviously he's not going to like it.
Has he like offered anything to you to be like, hey, just don't
so
track me?
when he was when he first contacted me, it was like a month of messaging, like a message a week maybe, and then he was like, "How about 5,000 for the account?" And then I asked for 50 because like 5,000 is like really nothing. Like it is like a good amount of money, but like for what the stakes are at, like I don't think it was worth to take it down for that.
Especially when he bought something for 44 billion. Cool. So, going off of just like Twitter quotes again, I noticed your tweet, I think it was last night, about jet lag as a choice and talking about carbon emissions. Is that something that you actually believe in? Like, hey, we should, tone down private jet use, or is that something you're just kind of leaning into?
Like it's just like cut off private jets, which is obviously going to like create a bigger issue. Like people can't do the business they need to do, but like I don't think people should be posting pictures like really like Kim Kardashian or like talk like that when you're in a public spotlight. I don't think it's good. Like I put the emissions stuff in the landing posts, and like I try to just leave it to that because like I feel like people don't really like respect like people like Greta Thunberg that much because it's like just over the top, with carbon. But like when I saw that thing that she said at the Super Bowl, I was like, that's kind of like really messed up, especially like in your spotlight. Like I don't think that like someone that high up should like want people to think that like she's just someone who doesn't care, And I've seen a lot of talk of like where her fans want her to speak up on issues more, and it seems like she doesn't like really do it,
Yeah. Okay. Just to be honest, when she first said that, I was like, that's awesome. Just from an aviation point of view. I'm like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
I know where you're coming from
It seems
with
cool,
like carbon
but,
stuff.
it doesn't seem like the responsible thing to do.
Yeah. No, I know where you're coming from with all that. So my question to you, like a follow up to that is like, so Taylor and like, Kim Kardashian, obviously Elon, get a bunch of, criticism for their private jet use and like carbon footprint. But at the same time, there's like, companies like John Deere, Sands Corporation in Vegas, MGM International, who have like these fleets of like G550s, G4s, a 747 for Sands Corp, and they're flying them daily.
Yeah,
And
like
it's
even,
like they're getting away with it, and these guys are taking the brunt of it.
yeah, and even like Drake,
Yeah, it's 767.
Yeah.
that's like really kind of messed up. It's different with like Mark Cuban with the 757 because he doesn't fly that around. I don't know what's going on with Drake's, but like Mark Cuban's is for the football team or the basketball team.
Yeah, so that makes a lot more sense because they would have to charter from an airline anyways for that. So
Well, but then there's also like other NFL teams, or other athletic teams and
Yeah.
NFL teams.
That team-
Patriots. I think they
that's-
still have it. They might have recently gotten rid of the 767s they had.
Yeah.
But Arizona Cardinals have a 7.
yeah, no, I think it's just interesting that these people are getting the brunt of it when there's these corporations just like crushing, right? Like
Sure.
jetting. But not to get too far from that. You touched on Mark Cuban a little bit. You were tracking him for a sec, right? And
Yeah. And then
what happened with that?
he also contacted me. The messages were kind of like weird because like he said one thing and then like I agreed to like stop. And like he kind of changed what he was gonna do. Like he said he would like tweet about it, and he said that he's glad I stopped. But then like he didn't really do that. I've gotten Mavs tickets from him. But, I mean,
Least he can do, right?
yeah.
Wow.
And he said like by ending this, you'll have me as your friend for life. But like I'm not gonna stop for. It's like kind of crazy because you would think that like Elon or Mark Cuban would be the person to send a letter like that, not Taylor Swift. Like it makes you almost want to not, it makes someone who comes like at a nicer aspect like Mark Cuban, like, it makes you want to stop more than someone who sends a letter like that.
Yeah. I thought, from my point of view, the Taylor thing was weird just because, we've seen how Elon's hit like an impasse like legally with all this.
Yeah.
So I guess to round it out is where are you, as much as you can talk to us about it, with any legal issues with Elon or Taylor?
There's like nothing basically. Like it's just like a letter.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that cost her more in PR than anything and put more attention on it than anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Elon said he would, him taking legal action against Sweeney or whatever. And like companies like ADSB Exchange, they just don't put it in the spotlight. They have received, hundreds of cease and desists even before I started doing this. Like Bernard Arnold, he sent like 2 cease and desists to ADSB Exchange. Then famously he sold his private jet because someone else started tracking him like I did on Twitter. Yeah.
But and then there's an ADSB exchange. You can track a variety of military aircraft as well that
Yeah.
might be considered sensitive by the U.S. government.
Yeah, there was some representative that talked to one of the military magazines, and they were like, they didn't like it actually, but like it's crazy because they're allowed to turn it off, really.
Yeah, they can. That's what I was about to say. It's usually when they have it on, it's because they want people to see. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. So quick question: if you had to give someone a tip to avoid getting tracked, like me, I'm gonna go buy a jet, and I don't want to get tracked by Jack Sweeney. What steps could I take to do that?
Okay, so obviously you put it on the FAA LADD list. Honestly, that might be enough, but like you can also get PIA and then a third party call sign, but like you start to inconvenience your like maintenance operations and stuff with that because installing that is like it's painful. Because once you get approval from the FAA, then you have to give that usually to your aircraft manufacturer.
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah, so it's
put new
a ton
software.
of layers.
Yeah, it's.
Okay.
I think
So
Taylor Swift and other people would be better off giving money to like the NBAA to like get laws in place and stuff for them changing this stuff.
that's what I was about to talk to you about, is like the legislative like problem with this is like if there is legislation that eventually, allows like a tailor to block her aircraft information from ADS-B receivers, that would require actually probably like all the ADS-B receivers inside aircraft already to be updated somehow to be able to still pick up that data, because that's like a safety of flight issue if you can't,
So there's like a bill in the House. Yeah, there's one of the FAA bills, and one of the things it says is within a year of passing of this, that the FAA would have to do a study on encrypting ADS-B. One of the other things is that kind of like the LAD list, that people could request their information not be on the FAA registry. I don't know what else there is. Oh, and then that there's also another program, kind of like PIA, where they can just get different hex codes, the transponder codes for their plane.
that's a whole. The thing with that is, so I was like on a comms team that was communicating the ADS-B upgrade back in 2019 when it was all happening, and that itself, just implementing ADS-B was in aircraft was just a pain. So like getting them to be like, hey, you got to read encrypted stuff now and you got to update it this way, it would be also just like the same problem.
Yeah, exactly. And like that's the U.S. aspect.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Are you aware of any, Jack, other countries that sort of manage ADS-B privacy at all, or is there any other places where you can't
I don't
track
know.
certain?
So the interesting thing is, they somehow expanded the PIA program recently to be like a little bit more international. I saw it's actually a guy I know that graduated from UCF, and he has a private jet, and he flew to like Japan or something, and he didn't install PIA himself, and the code doesn't change because like they don't care, but it's just a leftover. And it flew to Japan with the PIA code on, and so the MEAA released a statement about how the program recently expanded, but it wasn't about like flying completely internationally. It was kind of like over maybe like the Caribbean or something like that. So I don't know. It's not very transparent, and I don't know what's going on, like with how that program is expanding.
I just got kind of a left field question, but I've been curious based on the discussion we just had, is that, to kind of send a cease and desist notice, you got to have some basic legal ground to do it. You got to find something that claims that, the person's being damaged, right? Not a lawyer, not a legal expert, but, read a few of this here and there that I'm sure there's got to be something. So what are these, from a legal standpoint, what are they claiming? Are they claiming that you're violating their reasonable right of privacy?
I mean, they just tried to like cite, there's somewhere where it's like they're citing like California like stalking laws or something, but like in that law, and the thing is, like, I'm in Florida anyway, so like you would have to, it's crazy. But in there, for every statement, there's an exception for newsworthy information too. So like that's kind of crazy.
Got it. Yeah, I was looking over the letter a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and there's you don't even need me to say this because there's tons of people other commenting it. Like, you wouldn't send it, state like more legal stuff than like other people's Instagram comments. Like, that's kind of crazy for them to do that. Yeah.
Well, I have one more question for you. Ryan might have another, but what's the end game of all this, or like what's your plan with this? And I swear that wasn't a Taylor Swift lyric, Russ. Just came out.
Man,
I'm sorry. I was trying not to do that the whole time.
Honestly, I really would like to do that website. It just dealing with social media, especially when your accounts get suspended, and the fact that you can't have an account for every jet you're tracking is like not the best. But I mean, yeah, I just want to like stick to aviation and software development because that's what I'm interested in.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, keep us updated on that. We'd love to talk about the website as you get that going.
Yeah. And then
Ryan,
because on the feeder, on the data side, like, I mean, I have my alternative to ADSB exchange, which is like not as huge. I mean, there's a lot of alternatives now, but like in the last like month or two, I've gained like maybe like 100 to 200 people sending in data, which is like crazy. It's like, it's kind of like satisfying to see like all the data coming in and like.
So
yeah, that's awesome.
Well, actually, you kind of took my last question, but I'll ask it differently. Is how many followers have you gained since the Super Bowl on Twitter, if you had to guess?
It's probably like at least 15,000, I would guess. Like, yeah, because that's my new account. Like my original Twitter account before it got suspended was like 150,000. Yeah. And then the original Elon Jet account was like 450,000, I think,
Yeah. And those got suspended by
Yeah, I mean,
once Elon bought it, or
I had like 30 Twitter accounts probably. Let me pull up the list real quick. Because like they weren't even all tracking people, or personal jets. I mean, so like some of the other ones I had were like the NASA aircraft, which I actually brought back recently, and then weather planes like the Hurricane Hunters and stuff like that. The firefighting ones, which is actually like one of the least working accounts because those firefighting planes fly in like rural areas, so the coverage for ADSB is not very good. But yeah, I mean, I haven't got anywhere near setting up accounts like that because it's just like too much work to.
What are some other ones that you want to set up? Do you have any other ideas that you're curious about?
I also had experimental planes, transport planes, and then the Virgin ones like Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit.
Dude, that like just thinking from our side, that would also be really good for our editorial team to track like Piper's new plane testing right now. Like
yeah,
theory.
exactly.
But that's like a whole like use case for it.
Yeah, that's what I had on the experimental, like the 777X, all the 10
cool.
Gulf streams.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movement, on the Boeing side of that too. You kind of see where they are in their testing process. That's great.
It's a whole thing we can get into in a whole episode of Boeing tracking. Well, Jack, this was like really cool, and we just wanted to talk to you from an aviation point of view, and I think this helped answer some questions I had about the whole thing.
Yeah, it's enjoyable when it's aviation people because you're able to like understand more between each other with how it goes on.
Cool. Well, I'm sure we'll have you on again. But
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks for tuning in to Inside Aviation pilot episode, our so-called Jack episode. Tune in next week for more exciting aviation content. Be sure to follow all Flying Magazine's aviation brands across all our social media platforms. We got obviously Flying Magazine itself, Planet Pilot, Airline Geeks, AvWeb, many more. Thanks for tuning in.
How are you going to expense the Eclipse flight? Because you have to go on that.
Well, it's actually sold out now. Earlier this morning, before we recorded, it was $1,500. Don't think I'd be able to expense that one.
Dude,
but now it's sold out.
It'd be a perfect flight for Southwest to try their new interior on because nobody's going to complain about it.
Really would be. But Delta is putting A220 on this flight from Austin to Detroit because it's got bigger windows, and A220's got a window in the lavatory, so you're gonna be able to see the solar eclipse no matter where you are in the airport.
Yes, dude, that would be my choice. But Well, two questions I have on you for that is what happens if it gets delayed? Can I get a refund on it if I paid for it? Are they guaranteeing eclipse sighting? And two, if these were able to be resold, you can mark these on Ticketmaster so much.
Well, first of all, I don't think there's a provision in the contract carriage Delta that allows for a refund on a non-refundable ticket, eclipse dependent. But I will tell you, even though the flight sold out and Southwest flights are really expensive still for a Southwest flight. I mean, they're, $600 or so bucks. The problem with Southwest is that you're not guaranteed a window seat. So, you're going to take a gamble regardless.
You're going to have to buy that A-list.
There's a few workarounds around it. Plenty of flights out there. You might be able to, I'm not going to give away my secrets, but you might be able to go find one that is very similarly timed on another airline that hasn't advertised it.
Yeah. And
which I
your
might be
secret
doing.
is the toilet seat with the window. That's your secret.
It's the best view.
Cool. All right.